President Biden is meeting with Afghanistan's president this week as U.S. forces leave the country. While the Afghan side is friendly, not so with Iran. Iran's president-elect turns down a Biden meeting, instead demanding the U.S. lift sanctions. On the topic of guns, Colorado and Texas taking two different approaches. Both states signed a slew of bills into law. Colorado's aim at gun control, while Texas becomes a Second Amendment sanctuary state. And as for the issue of health care, the Supreme Court has rejected some Republican states' legal challenge to Obamacare. They say it didn't meet a procedural standard. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome back. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Fresh off his European leg, President Biden is now set to entertain foreign leaders at home. Biden and Putin's face-off in Geneva, Switzerland made a splash last week. Now he's set to meet with Afghanistan's president this week. Meanwhile, Iran's leader is turning down Biden while demanding the U.S. lift sanctions. Biden is set to meet with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani Friday at the White House to discuss U.S. troop withdrawal. The White House says Biden will reassure Ghani of U.S. support, including diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian assistance. It says the U.S. will also help to make sure the country won't become a safe haven for terrorist groups. Afghanistan's former president said he thinks the country will be better off without the U.S. and NATO's military presence. In April, Biden decided to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. Since then, the Taliban terrorist group has taken at least 30 districts. Afghanistan's former president says NATO and U.S. troops were leaving behind a disaster, saying extremism was at its highest point. He adds that he wants the troops to leave and that Afghans were united behind an overwhelming desire for peace. He says they need to now take responsibility for their future. Members of one refugee family in Pakistan say they don't want to return home, even though U.S. forces are leaving. Right now, one expert says nearly 3 million Afghan refugees live in Pakistan, and they're expecting a new emergence of Taliban extremists after U.S. forces leave. Although the former president had harsh words for the U.S. in Afghanistan, he's optimistic about the future. He says this is the country of the Afghan people, and therefore the responsibility is upon us to work for our people, to work for peace, and to do 1,000,000 times more than those from abroad are doing for us. Officials say the Taliban hasn't offered a written peace proposal, yet that could be used as a starting point for substantial peace talks. Iran's president-elect, meanwhile, says he won't be meeting with Biden. This comes amid talks of re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. President-elect Ibrahim Raisi said at a news conference he supports U.S. re-entry into the deal, saying America should immediately return to the deal and fulfill its obligations under the deal. Negotiations have been underway since April. The U.S. pulled out in 2018 under then-President Trump. That's also when sanctions were slapped back on Iran. Iran has breached the deal, exceeding the deal's limits on how much Iran can enrich uranium. The deal's limits aim to reduce risk of nuclear weapons potential. Tehran has long denied having such goals. On the issue of Tehran's missile program, Raisi echoed Iran's hardline supreme leader, saying Iran's regional activities and ballistic missile program were non-negotiable. Raisi is calling on the U.S. to lift all sanctions. He himself is under U.S. sanctions. That's for his involvement in mass executions. That's according to the U.S. and human rights groups. When asked about the human rights allegations, Raisi said he was, quote, proud to have defended human rights in every position. The 1988 mass execution saw some 5,000 people killed. It marked a dark end to the Iran-Iraq war. But even if the U.S. lifts sanctions, Raisi says he will not meet with Biden. The White House did not immediately respond to Raisi's statements. Now, let's turn from ballistic missiles to a different weapons debate, guns. Let's start in Colorado, where Governor Jared Polis signed several new gun control bills over the weekend. One law allows cities to set their own gun regulations. The NRA, meanwhile, says this will create a confusing patchwork of laws that are difficult to follow. Together, these measures will make our communities safer, keep firearms out of the hands of those who would do harm to themselves or others, and get those in crisis help as soon as possible. A flurry of gun control legislation started earlier this year in Colorado after a Syrian-born man allegedly shot and killed 10 people in a supermarket, including a police officer. Colorado Senate Majority Leader Stephen Fenberg says the new laws are about pain, loss, and trauma. He says he expects more gun control laws will be introduced. The NRA says the legislature passed the laws over the objections of thousands of people who support the Second Amendment. Over in Texas, a different approach. The Lone Star State is now a Second Amendment sanctuary state and a constitutional carry state. Texans don't need any permit to carry their handguns starting in September. Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed 7 gun bills into law on Thursday, and one of the bills makes Texas a constitutional carry state, meaning that from September 1st, legal gun owners don't need any permit to either open carry or conceal carry their handguns. He says while people say their Second Amendment rights are being infringed upon, Texas will not let that happen. Another bill makes Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary state. The signing ceremony took place at the Alamo, the cradle of liberty for Texas. The governor paid tribute to the men and women that defended the Alamo mission back in 1836. He explains its symbolic significance, saying they knew as much as anybody the necessity of being able to carry a weapon for the purpose of defending yourself against attack by others. A reporter asked Abbott about a shooting in Austin last week that left a man dead. The governor said he visited the family of the victim and that it was a tragic event. He noted the family asked that the tragedy committed by a teen not be a reason to eliminate gun rights in America. As for the other 5 bills, 2 of them prohibit governments from restricting gun sales during declared disasters and from contracting with firms that discriminate against gun businesses like the NRA. One bill removes requirements for holsters. Another allows travelers visiting Texas to store firearms in their hotel rooms. And the last bill bars federal regulations from gun suppressors made and used in Texas. And on the topic of guns, what about that couple in St. Louis, Missouri, who held out their guns when Black Lives Matter protesters approached their home last June? They're back in the news. Mark McClowskey and his wife are back at the gun shop. That's after the couple pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges, and officials confiscated his firearm. He tells Newsmax he still has other guns and plans to buy more once ATF clears his record. McClowskey posted pictures to Twitter of him and his wife inside of a gun shop. A court ordered the guns from the now famous videos to be melted down. McClowskey says he would have preferred to donate or auction the rifle because it holds some historical value. While they pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges, they are not backing down from their position on gun rights. McClowskey explains his guilty plea to Newsmax, saying the prosecutor dropped all the felony charges and gun charges, and only charged him with a crime that said he purposely placed other people in apprehension of imminent fear of physical injury. He says that's what guns are for, to scare off people and make sure they don't approach. He adds that is what the Second Amendment is there for. He'll pay a $750 fine for his guilty plea. His wife will pay a $2,000 fine for her guilty plea. Mark McClowskey likens the fines to a parking ticket. And they will not have to spend any time in jail, but have to surrender the guns they used in the incident. Mark McClowskey explains that the situation was like on that day. He says, "We grabbed our weapons and we stood out on the front porch, which is what the Second Amendment is there for, to keep and bear arms. We were bearing our arms." McClowskey says he pled guilty to keep St. Louis from having to bear the expenses of lengthy court proceedings. He said he is now focused on his Senate run. He is running as a Republican for U.S. Senate in Missouri next year. And now, before we end, what about health care? The Supreme Court has rejected some Republican states' legal challenge to Obamacare. The Supreme Court ruled 7-2 on Thursday that the GOP challengers to Obamacare lack standing to sue. Justice Stephen Breyer wrote the opinion for the majority, saying the plaintiffs were not in a position to bring the claim because they didn't demonstrate any past or future harm. Biden called it a win for Americans, but not everyone agrees. Senator John Barrasso said in a statement, "The failed Obamacare system will stagger on us as a result of this decision," adding every American's health care has been harmed by Obamacare. He is a medical doctor who has worked to repeal the law. And a legal expert, Zach Smith, notes that they didn't make any judgment on the arguments of the case. He says the case was all about standing and not about the merit of the Obamacare case. Many Republicans were disappointed with the ruling, but some White House officials and Democratic congressional leaders celebrated the decision. This case was brought in 2018 by Texas and 17 Republican states, plus 2 individuals. It argued the individual mandate provision in the Affordable Care Act was not constitutional. That provision puts a tax penalty on all individuals who didn't get health insurance. In 2012, the court defined the mandate as a tax. But in 2017, the tax penalty was reduced to 0, and the lawsuit argues this makes the provision unconstitutional. While the lower courts had largely supported the Republicans' argument, 20 blue states and the Democrat-led House appealed to the Supreme Court. Justices Alito and Gorsuch are against the ruling. Alito argues the plaintiffs do have standing, and instead of defending the constitutionality of the individual mandate, the court simply ducks by arguing there's no standing. He believes the mandate is clearly unconstitutional. Smith says that it will likely continue to see legal challenges to Obamacare in the future. And as for how Americans view it, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, only 54% of Americans view Obamacare favorably. And according to the Urban Institute, premiums have fallen for the last 3 years. But the healthcare law is still facing criticism for out-of-pocket costs. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.